4 Years of Breakfast, aka 69 Diner Love Songs. Tales of our favorite meal, stretching from the streets of Moscow to every diner counter in these United States. The Audacity of Breakfast, January 7, 2009. On the eve of November 4, 2008, I found myself outside the Obama campaign's Northern California headquarters, straddling the border between Berkeley and Oakland as crowds of Americans thronged to the street corners of history. When the junior senator from Illinois first announced his candidacy for the office of President of the United States, the political scientist in me was quick to fortify the barricades of skepticism. By 8 p.m. on election night, the American in me decided that no reasoned analysis can restrain the joys of being part of a drunken mob. Yes, I did. Such a historic evening, of course, called for a historic hangover cure. With the glee of a new president shining down upon the East Bay, I made my way to my favorite counter to celebrate with a man named Jody. Many tales could be told about the 69-year-old, 5'3" answer to the chicken and the egg that is Jody Royston. What you really need to know is that this is a man who never said goodbye, always had a bag of dry dog food behind the counter for his customers' best friends and greased his griddle with generous amounts of I can't believe it's not butter. He built a 20-year legacy of home-cooked hospitality in a hole in the wall under the BART track in Albany, a paramount of neighborhoodism that managed to outdo the model neighborhood in which it was tucked away. He never had a use for more than 6 diners at his counter and proudly displayed an 8x10 close-up of himself, sucking the last morsels of flavor off of a fried chicken leg that he had just taken out of the fryer, behind the customers who had become a part of his family. The food at Jody's was as much a labor of love as the restaurant itself. Jody's ingredients were always bought fresh and local, even when fresh and local mean Minute Maid. Never one to pander, Jody cooked for his customers the way he cooked for his grandchildren, one of whom is a regular cook behind the counter. Homemade grits and fried chicken were served on weekends. His country scramble, a ribbon of medium-cooked yolk swirled over scrambled white, was the non-negotiable style of eggs cooked to order. His English muffins, crisped on the griddle, redefined the meaning of nook and cranny. The mango cheesecake was baked at home by Jody's wife. Jody's specials, all 40 plus of them, weren't so much bold new directions or trussed-up classics as they were startling visitations of the expected. Eggs Royston and something different turned eggs Benedict on their yolks, amassing all kinds of flavor and texture, i.e. English muffins, grilled tomatoes, onions, and peppers, hash browns, and chopped bacon, beneath a blanket of flash-poached eggs and homemade hollandaise. The torta sent the concept of corned beef hash through Jody's filter of flavor, mixing fresh corned beef with country hash browns and grilled vegetables to a delightfully crisp end. Nothing, the cook's own breakfast omakase, would yield a different concoction every time, sometimes involving ingredients as far-reaching as fresh cactus. Jody's with a Y, which crowned a plate of grits with a country scramble and chopped or ground hot link, was so stupidly tasty that it called into question the value of every food not named after a customer and presented on a tackily decorated sheet of laminated printer paper. With this knowledge in our stomachs, my comrades and I walked into Jody's for a taste of his latest special, the Obama. It started with a layer of hash browns. Jody topped the browned potatoes with 3 strips of beef brisket and anointed the combination with his homemade Arkansas barbecue sauce, a tomato-free dressing of molasses, vinegar, and other heavenly sources of tang. The entire platter was just small enough to be enjoyed as seconds on top of any other of Jody's specials, which is fortunate, because on the morning after the greatest election of my short lifetime, I was hungry enough for 8 years of barbecue. The bundle was laid next to a flapjack and served with an expression of relief. Newspapers were flocking from their shelves. Echoes of the words, "Yes, we did," sounded throughout the city. Under the BART track in Albany, though, this historic outpouring of pride and community was little more than a twinkle in Jody's eye. After all, pride and community were nothing new to a man who had spent 20 years in a hole in the wall. It's just a shame that it took the rest of the country this long to catch up with him for breakfast. Friendship over easy, October 16, 2009. By Zach Mann. I've never made friends by campaigning on the Good Eats platform. Most of my friendships were wrought by geographical circumstance and a love for all things geeky. James is no different. We originally began correspondence as I blogged from Moscow and eventually found friendship in science fiction television, but I'll never forget the first time we discussed pizza, on the eve of James's daily Californian column on the subject. We shared our angst toward the favorite slices of the Berkeley student majority and exchanged our own favorites lists of Berkeley pies, lists that matched far too well. One day we discussed the merits of barbecue, the point of no return, and, well, now I'm writing this. My friendship with David is another matter. Born out of 4th grade art hour, when the new kid drew a better chimpanzee than I drew an iguana, our friendship grew over the ensuing 4 years, as I cheated off of David in every math class, until he moved to the other side of Los Angeles, and I failed geometry. When we finally reunited in a college dorm triple, we'd become different people, and our friendship changed into something new, born out of the Sopranos and Iron Chef marathons. 8 years later, David is my oldest friend and the person with whom I'm most likely to spend an hour arguing the merits of Good Eats. Ostensibly, my food-founded relationship with David began while I envied his drawing abilities in 4th grade. His mother was a restaurateur, and that was always some background detail I knew about David, even though I went to his restaurant only a couple times between 4th grade and college. The restaurant, a greasy spoon in Venice Beach called House of Teriyaki, which later moved down the street and became HOT, 2, then changed to Venice, was not a visible factor in my life until after college, when David and I both returned to Los Angeles and David became Venice's head cook, co-owner and everyday fixture. My longtime friend became my chef friend. Our relationship goes beyond the culinary, of course, but food will always be a big part of the friendship. When David's passion for Good Eats evolved into a passion for the art of cookery, that aspect of our relationship changed. It's different, dining with someone who works in a restaurant. David approaches his food like a chemist, breaking down the tastes and smells into ingredients, inferring from a bite how his order was made, and measuring out his respect for the establishment in plain terms. He spies into the kitchens of wherever we are eating, muses on what kind of restaurant he would like to open one day, and always tips the staff far too much. However, the word chef didn't really apply to David when it came to Venice. His cooking there was of the short order variety, and his creativity was limited to the versatility of eggs on a griddle. David did what he could, scraping together omelets out of subpar ingredients and serving up an uninteresting yet never disappointing menu of the usual diner options. He added his flair where he could, with quaintly painted tables and a charmingly sketched menu, and Venice evolved into a cool place for locals in the Venice area, or anyone on the west side that hungers for diner food without the $10 price tag, including me. Going to Venice became a ritual. I said hellos to a staff that often included my friends and stared down David as he slaved away in the kitchen, letting him know I was there, telling him not to screw up my order and challenging him to impress me. Afterwards, I joined him in the parking lot during a smoke break and chatted up the meal, other meals, and life in general. It was a good breakfast experience, and truthfully, I would have been a regular at Venice even if David hadn't been there, because I appreciated rice as a side dish that much, and I really did love their veggie rancheros. Truthfully, at the time, David was not a chef. He was just a guy who looked up to Iron Chef Sakai, like toddlers looked up to firemen and astronauts. At Venice, he was king of his short-order castle, wearing a smock and chef's pants like George Costanza wore velvet, if it were socially acceptable. Outside of Venice, David led an underachieving existence of simple creature comforts and recreational sleeping habits, talking trash on Mario Batali, Bobby Flay and other celebrity chefs without ever having gone to culinary school himself. But David was still my chef friend. He had a chef's potential and a chef's mindset, as evidenced by the Mac knife he carried around in the trunk of his car, and there was a strain of real passion for the craft lurking somewhere on his person. After trying Buchan's scrambled eggs, David became obsessed with learning how to recreate what he still considers to be the holy grail of breakfast. After I told David about Jocko's and the best Sunnyside egg of my life, he charged himself with repeating it. I'm sure that for the rest of his life he will continue to chase perfection in the kitchen, even if it isn't Kitchen Stadium. One day, David moved to Pittsburgh. Just like that, the Venice era of David's career and the Los Angeles phase of our friendship ended. Where David and his Mac knife would end up was now up to him, as he continued on a career path that promised to skate the razor's edge between cook and chef for some time, a vocational hazard, but I kept expectations high. We both stood in the eye of the quarter-life crisis hurricane, unsure where we'd be next year, but he reminded me that I was the one who cheated off of him in math class. An appreciation of food culture will always be a reoccurring theme with us, but in Los Angeles David and I found more to talk about than good eats. We'll always have Venice and Los Angeles, but I mostly look forward to the day I visit him wherever he ends up cooking, when we burn hours at coffee shops, check out a local restaurant and talk about how life has been between then and now, because as it stands, things are looking sunny side up.